what we understand is that many of the people, including our named plaintiffs, are not members of the gang. So for that reason alone, this is illegal.
The administration's noncompliance with the judge's order in conducting deportations under the Alien Enemies Act after a judge had said that those deportations could not proceed does pose a serious threat to our system of checks and balances, to rule of law in the United States. It is part of a troubling pattern, however, of noncompliance with district court orders or trial court orders. I think the real test is whether we see continued noncompliance. And I know that ACLU, which is representing the plaintiffs and trying to prevent the use of the Alien Enemies Act outside the scope of its text, that they are raising the noncompliance with the court today.
It doesn't matter in these cases whether the planes were over international waters or not. The defendants, President Trump, the Secretary of Homeland Security, those folks were all within DC and so subject to federal jurisdiction. The larger issue is the Trump administration seems invested in making this a fight. And that really does raise this huge question of what happens if the executive branch can get away with defying court orders. I don't think, non-compliance with one order in one case is necessarily the end of the rule of law. But the question is, what is to compel the government to comply in future cases? Because in a world in which the government can pick and choose which court orders it wants to comply with, the law is going to mean whatever the president says, not whatever the courts say.
This is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
The reason that the president is invoking the Alien Enemies Act is to bypass those due process protections that exist in immigration law. This wartime authority has never been interpreted to include due process protections for individuals who are the citizens or natives of a country with which we're at war. And so even if a person is not actually a member of Tren de Aragua, just the government is accusing them of that without evidence, Trump is hoping that that will be enough for him to put people into detention and then deport them out of the country. So deporting people who we actually don't know what they've done, deporting people who very well may be innocent. And then I think the other thing that's worth noting here is that the Alien Enemies Act proclamation issued by the president includes people who are lawfully present in the United States, whether they're visa holders, individuals under TPS programs, or alternatively, individuals with credible, valid asylum claims who are here lawfully.
Some of the behind the scenes on how carried out some of the deportations of the flight.
The president did the right thing. I stand by it. I thought we removed in one day over 200 dangerous people, including MS-13. It was the right thing to do. And I see the video that President Bukele put out. It was a beautiful thing. These people are going to be held accountable.
We might all think that a lot of these folks are bad people who shouldn't be in the United States, but they're entitled to a legal process to make sure, one, that they are who the government says they are, two, that the government has the authority it's claiming that it has, and three, that we're not sending them into conditions where they credibly fear torture or other forms of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. So part of why I think we're seeing so much litigation activity is because it's pretty hard to unring the bell. Once individuals are removed from the United States, once they're handed off to other countries, that's probably the point at which the ability of federal courts to compel the return of those individuals stops. It's part of why we're seeing efforts to actually block the removals before they happen. Up to that point, though, I think it's well established that the federal courts have the power to halt the removal from the United States of citizens, non-citizens, criminals, non-criminals, whomever, until providing the process that's required by statutes and by the Constitution. So the remedies we're talking about here are the remedies we're seeing, which is temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, maybe even writs of habeas corpus, to ensure that the government can't just point at someone, accuse them of something, and use it as the basis for summarily removing them from the United States.
I don't want to downplay the tremendous seriousness, gravity of what our constitutional system not having appropriate checks and balances would look like. And what we saw the last time that the Alien Enemies Act was invoked was it was used to intern 31,000 non-citizens of Japanese, German, and Italian descent based on their ancestry, not actually based on their conduct or any dangerousness that could have been shown through due process. And that was during a real war. That was from a president who was actually trying to keep the country safe in World War II. We all agree, I think, that internment was shameful and that it should not be repeated. Now imagine this same tool that was responsible for 31,000 people being interned without due process, being turned against immigrants who are here lawfully, who may be here unlawfully, simply based on where they were born. It's un-American, and I hope that the courts will find it illegal.
I think we're on very dangerous ground here. This is as lawless an action as the administration has taken. If the administration is allowed to use wartime authorities anytime it wants to remove people, I think we are going to see more and more people being subjected to this type of Alien Enemies Act and a blurring of wartime authority with domestic authority. I cannot stress how important it is that the federal courts prevent this from happening. So the Alien Enemies Act was enacted in 1798, and it's a wartime authority that can only be used when the United States is in a declared war with another nation or another nation is invading our country. It cannot be used against simply a gang. And notably, it's only been used 3 times in our country's history, all during declared wars: the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. We are aware of no authority for applying it to a regular gang, even if the gang has infiltrated to some extent another nation's government. If this is not a foreign government, then it cannot be used. Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts to what's going on. The first is, even if any of the individuals are members of the gang, the law cannot be used for straight immigration purposes because the TDA is not a foreign government or nation. But beyond that, even if it were legal to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, these individuals must be given an opportunity to show that they are not members of the gang. And what we understand is that many of the people, including our named plaintiffs, are not members of the gang. So for that reason alone, this is illegal. We asked the court to immediately issue a temporary restraining order stopping all removals. We do not know whether the removals that are being posted took place before the court's order or after, and we've asked the government to clarify. But if they took place after the court's order, then they would have violated the court's direction. The videos, though, do make clear that there is absolutely irreparable harm to these individuals, and that the court was absolutely correct to move quickly to restrain any further removals. If anybody was turned over to a foreign government after the court's order, then we would hope that the United States government would work with that foreign government to get the individuals back. Whether the court went beyond that and issued sanctions or contempt orders will be up to the court. Fundamentally, what's going on is a separation of powers problem. The Alien Enemies Act lays out very, very specific criteria for when it can be used. The Trump administration has ignored that by applying it to a gang rather than a foreign government or nation. And on top of that, the administration is ignoring the immigration laws that Congress has passed that ensure that people can have a right to seek protection against persecution or torture. So at bottom, we have the administration thumbing their nose at Congress.
What do you say to Americans who want safe streets but are concerned due process is being violated?
The president is using every lever of his executive authority and his constitutional authority within the bounds of the immigration laws of our country to ensure that our streets are safer for law-abiding American citizens.
This will be challenged later today in the courts. Does the president, does this allow him to defy the court order without having this the checks and balances and the separation of power?
No, in fact, this administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court.